Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I'm going to be doing a quick review of The Brothers Sisters by Patrick DeWitt. I came across this book because of Mark from the Slowly Read channel. He did a review of it and I loved the sound of the book and he said that he thought I would probably enjoy it. So I picked it up and I read it over the space of 24 hours and I was absolutely hooked. I really enjoyed it. Before I jump into my actual review, I'm just going to give you a very quick synopsis of what the book is about. You are essentially following two brothers, Eli and Charlie's sisters. They are criminals. They are essentially almost like guns for hire, and they have been tasked with finding this other man who has apparently stolen something, and they've been told to find him and kill him and retrieve the thing that he has allegedly stolen. So the book starts off in Oregon, and then they are tasked with traveling to find this person in San Francisco. You are going on this journey with the two brothers as they meet a cast of very eclectic characters, all from different walks of life. Overall, I absolutely loved it. I gave it a very high rating, which I'll get to at the end. And I think it's a really good book. So without further ado, let's jump right into what I liked about it and then what I think other people might have a problem with it, because I genuinely don't really have anything bad to say about this book. So what I liked about it, I really liked Eli. So you are told the story from Eli's perspective. It is a single POV. Eli is kind of like the moral compass of the book. He is the kind brother. He is the brother that wants to quit his current life and do something honest and good and true and that isn't essentially criminal. And then you have Charlie on the other hand of that, who is brutal. He kind of enjoys what he does. He likes the power. He likes being the leader. Having these two brothers, you know, Eli is the younger one and Charlie is the older one. So having these two brothers kind of on very different paths in some ways, even though they're both doing the same job, but that I think emotionally and mentally and psychologically, they are on very different paths. The thing I really liked about Eli is that he's almost quite childlike. He's very naive in certain ways. He looks at things in a very black and white way. And it's really interesting to see his thought process on certain things, women being one topic or prospecting being another thing. This book is set just at the start of the gold rush in California. And he makes these little, he says these little ditties throughout and you're just like, oh, I want to like snap that and put it on my wall because it's so good. Eli is really interesting as well because he is not a very good person. He's quite twisted. He does some really messed up stuff. He says some really messed up stuff. His relationship with Eli is pretty fraught as well, but he has a really interesting arc. He starts off with being this really kind of hard-nosed, very rough, tough individual. Throughout the book, you start to learn more about him and why he is the way that he is. There is something that happens to the two of them when they are children. Charlie, being the older brother, takes it upon himself to do something in that situation. I'm not going to say what it is because I don't want to spoil it. It changes something in him and you can kind of understand why he is the way that he is. It definitely doesn't excuse him from what he does and what he says, but you can start to understand, you can start to peel back certain layers of his character and his personality and ultimately why he does the things that he does. Also, something happens to Charlie later on in the book and it changes him. And you see this really interesting development of his character from, I think, maybe 2/3 of the book up until the end. And I think it was done really well. For some people, it might feel a little bit fast, but I actually think given what happened and the situation that led to what happened, I really like the way that they played off each other. Eli, throughout the book, questions his relationship with Charlie because they are so different. And being in his mind and seeing Charlie through his perspective is really interesting. I kind of wish we did have Charlie's perspective a little bit to see Eli through his POV, but I liked that we were looking it through the kind of moral compass of the book. The other thing I really enjoyed about this book is the varied cast of characters that we meet. We meet about 6 or 7 characters, if I remember correctly, and they all have a role to play in this story. You know, there's a couple of women that the two meet and, you know, Eli's quite shy and he has this really interesting relationship with women. And it's not necessarily a bad relationship, but he's quite naive and he's quite immature in the way that he thinks about women, but not in a disrespectful way. Whereas Charlie, he's just an asshole and he just doesn't treat women particularly well. There's one female character interaction that he has in particular that I really enjoyed. And I actually reread it twice because I really liked the conversation that they had and it was really satisfying. And then you meet a bunch of other characters. You meet a young boy, you meet like a beggar, you meet a prospector, you know, you meet kind of a bunch of different characters along the way. They all almost have like a lesson to teach to Eli. Less so to Charlie because Charlie thinks he knows everything, but more to Eli and by extension, the reader. The backdrop of this book is also really interesting because it's set during the beginnings of the California gold rush. The two characters, as I mentioned, start out in Oregon and then they are going through into San Francisco. I really liked the way that you transition from Oregon to San Francisco. Oregon is quite desolate. There's not really much going on. It's kind of on the edge of modernity and it's just kind of like a bit of a wasteland. Whereas as soon as they enter into San Francisco, it's this kind of gleaming metropolis where gold is everywhere, prospectors are everywhere, there is hope, there are dreams that people want to realize, and money really is the key. There were small things that I really liked about showing the differences between San Francisco and Oregon. As an example, the two brothers go for dinner in San Francisco and the prices are hugely inflated. To get the same meal in Oregon, it would be a fraction of the price. And I like those little details that were kind of dotted throughout the story. There are a lot of themes in this book that tackle so many different issues. One is kind of greed, one is identity, another one is kind of familial relationships and how they play out in reality. Another one is money, power, you know, the kind of normal things that you would expect in a Western. And I think seeing it through Charlie's perspective, you know, he says these little sentences here and there and you're like, damn, I want to unpack that. And I really want to think about it and talk about it because he says some really profound things. I'm actually just going to read one or two quotes that I really liked in this book because I think they need to be called out. I actually have 10, but I'm not going to read them all. I'm going to read 2, maybe 3 actually. So the first one is this one. Most people are chained to their own fear and stupidity and haven't the sense to level a cold eye at just what is wrong with their lives. Most people will continue on, dissatisfied but never attempting to understand why or how they might change things for the better. And they die with nothing in their hearts but dirt and old blood. I had to take a minute when I read that and I just like sat there for about 30 minutes thinking about it. Let it sink in. The other quote that I really liked was, "What will the world be, I thought, without money hung around our necks, hung around our very souls?" And then the last one that I will pick, let's just pick one more. "A great man then is one who can make something from nothing." There's just so many little like one-liners dotted out throughout this book like that. You know, I picked like 10, but I could have very easily picked like 50. And I think there are a lot of really interesting undertones to this book. I think it's a good entryway into Westerns actually, because it's very palatable. The writing style is very accessible and the characters are, and I think Eli is quite relatable in certain ways. In terms of what people might not necessarily like about it, it's quite grim. There's a lot of really kind of depressing things happening in the book, but I would argue that that is counteracted quite a lot by some of the humor. The humor is quite dark. The other thing is that there are potentially some trigger warnings. Animal abuse is, I mean, it's not really abuse to the animals, but there is definitely some stuff that happens to some of the animals in the book. And if you don't like kind of harm to animals, then definitely don't read it. You know, it's set during the Wild West, right? So there's going to be some violence and there's going to be some swearing and, you know, all of that. So if you also don't like that and you have a very low threshold for that sort of stuff, then I probably wouldn't recommend it for you. But overall, I love this book. I gave it 5 stars. I thought it was really well executed. I think the story flows really well. I only wish it had been longer, to be honest with you. And as a result, I am definitely going to pick up more of Patrick DeWitt's books. It's dark, it's unforgiving, it's got humor in it, but it's also very dark and unforgiving. If you want to get insight into the gold rush and the transition that the US was going through at that time, specifically California, I think this is a really good entryway into that because there's not too much info dumping or context or anything like that. It's weaved really well into the story, and I think it's also really well paced. One other last thing I will mention is that it's obviously not super plot driven. This is a very character driven book. It's centered around, you know, the main POV. And if you're looking for a really sophisticated plot, like this is not it. So just bear that in mind. And that's it, folks. I just wanted to do a quick review on this book because I think it's really good. And I think you should go pick it up, especially if you like Westerns or if you want a nice entryway into Westerns. It's nice and short. It's very palatable and it's an excellent read. Patrick DeWitt, hats off to you. Going to be reading more of your stuff. That's it for today, folks. Let me know if you read it down below or if you have any questions on the book. I'd be more than happy to answer. I hope you all have a lovely day. I'll speak to you soon. Stay safe. Take care. Bye.